What's up folks, and welcome back to some Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen. Today's video is going to be a little bit different from the normal gameplay aspects we focus on, because yesterday I started doing some reading into the lore behind Pantheon, and I discovered that there is a huge amount of rich backstory for almost each and every part of this game. Everything from the classes, the race, almost each and everything I've come across. But none of them intrigue me more than the story behind the world itself, Terminus. I want to start by saying that we'll be breaking these down into more digestible and bite-sized chunks. There's a lot of detail in the history within this game, and hell, I'm still reading through quite a lot of it as I go, so I think it'll be easier to split it up. The first thing you need to know about Terminus is that's not the name it was always known by. In the time before the ages, it was known only as the land of Nhystyrrok, but as I understand it, this was one of its many names, and the ruling class of this land is a race of dragons known as the Reignborn. The first thing you need to know about these dragons is that there were multiple types or families of them in the hierarchy. So far I've read about the dragons of air, who were apparently the main ruling class, the dragons of water, and in an older Q&A video I heard mention of a more bastardized version called the dragons of earth. In said older Q&A video for Pantheon back in 2021 that featured the lead writer, it was also said that there were other types of dragons not yet talked about that weren't exactly allied with Rok'Nhilthamos. Rok'Nhilthamos was the dragon king that ruled over the land for quite a time during the early ages. Rok'Nhilthamos is described as a dragon of mythic size and strength, so much so that he was able to lead the dragons of the air, the rival Reen, to be able to defeat their rivals beneath the ocean known as the Soul Crowmain. Now during this war, the father of Rok'Nhilthamos was still alive and still the acting Dragon King. After they together defeated the dragons of the sea, instead of the king proclaiming Rok'Nhilthamos as his heir, he instead mourned the death of his brother, who just so happened to be the ruler of Soul Crowmain that they had just defeated. But this didn't sit right with Rok'Nhilthamos, and in his rage, he promptly killed and usurped his father, becoming the new king of dragons as a result. To put Rok'Nhilthamos into perspective, in Game of Thrones there's a dragon known as Balerion the Dread. This seems like a proper comparison for the power and authority over dragons that Rok'Nhilthamos was capable of expressing, because just like Balerion, this dragon is huge. The reign of Rok'Nhilthamos lasted thousands of years before the arrival of the Sacred Six. The Sacred Six refers to the original six that arrived on Terminus after this early history went down. The dwarves, the elves, the ogres, the Darkmere, the humans, and the Archai. Now, although it's a current mystery as to why, sometime before the first era of collisions, the Reignborn left their lands of sovereignty, or at least they appeared to. In turn, all of dragonkind seemed to vacate their territories, no matter how big or small. The reason behind this might make a bit more sense as we read through the different ages, but in the game's present day, the dragons seem to be missing. They aren't dead, but something must have called them away. Some legends believe that the dragons have entered a great hibernation and lie in wait to one day reap the rewards of a great bounty. From a player's standpoint, it sounds like we might end up seeing the dragons return as a part of an expansion or major update. And by the way, I know what some of you are thinking. With games like Guild Wars 2, End of Dragons, and the upcoming World of Warcraft Dragon expansion, you're probably sick of hearing about them or think that they're overused at this point. But to be fair, in Pantheon's case, this lore was written over 4+ years ago, so they're not exactly just jumping on the bandwagon. In regards to the dragons going missing, the natives of Terminus adopted a similar calendar style to what we have in real life to mark the timeline behind this behavior. Picture the dragons starting to disappear as the birth of Christ in our terms, which would make the time before this BC. The time after, instead of AD, they decided to mark it as IH, or the Ithosbrun Hijilen, so they would say 456 IH. Regarding the legends, some even believe that they could possibly share in this great bounty, the sect of Perith being a prime example of one of these cults of dragon seekers. Their desire is to find and serve the dragons so that they may one day share in the endless heavenly fortune. Around the time of their disappearance, it was also rumored that there was an agreement struck between Rok'Nhilthamos and another power of unknown origin. As part of this agreement, Overused, which seems to be another name Terminus went by, was officially renamed into Terminus. A very rough portion or copy of this agreement, which started being known as the Dragon's Accord, can be found in the letters between the human historian Narian Castug and the elf Caolan Greyborn. To give a little bit more clarity on this accord, in these letters it's talked about how even the symbols of this mystical agreement can cause other things you scribe them on to gain magical properties. It's said to be written in a dragon language known as Drak-Elrin, one of the multiple that they're capable of using, but also the signature language of the Dragon King, Rok'Nhilthamos. This language seemed to be used for more than just describing the agreement. It's a fortified speech that seems to be filled with enchantment and, more notably, arcane encryption. It's unsure if it was ever spoken aloud, but it's often called upon by dragons for reasons just like this. As an example, the elf that Narion speaks with in these letters, which by the way only 3 of the letters are known of in the present age, ended up experimenting with the symbols written in this agreement. First they tried to copy it directly, but noticed that if there were more than 2 beside each other, the first inscription vanished entirely. They began to carve these symbols into materials such as dry oak. They found that when doing this and set it alight, the oak would not burn. Although it was completely engulfed in flames, they were able to retrieve it twice without incident. But after a short period of time, the etchings vanished, and so too did the protection. Now they tested this with multiple things: archery targets in a tournament, dipping parchments with the transcribing into fresh water or mud, even poisons. There was no secret that there was a very mystical element to every piece of this secret agreement. And as the elf began to correct the mistakes made in the transcribing by Narion, the delights and madness of the true accord began to manifest. But back to the Sacred Six. It's said that when the dwarves of Oldassa first arrived in the year of 7 IH, the last of the dragon kind withdrew into peculiar obscurity. Next came the elves in the 9th year of IH, followed by the ogres in the 12th. It's not really mentioned in the beginnings of the lore on how the Sacred Six first got here, but one thing to note is that any confusion that either you or I have experienced while diving into this lore is intentional. We're meant to only obtain pieces of the puzzle and discover the rest across our time within the game and perception systems. After these 3 civilizations appear on Terminus, around the 23rd year, the ogres lose their expansion-obsessed ruler, known as Rothuk the Black Moon King, to madness. Shortly after, the Age of Seclusion begins. In the following lore videos, we'll be discussing the next 3 ages: the Age of Seclusion, the Age of Chaos, and in the present day, the Age of Frail. In between these, we'll discuss other topics to help us fill in the blanks, but ultimately there's a lot more detail nestled in Q&As, developer videos, forum posts, and more that we'll need to hunt down. I'm looking forward to experiencing more of the story with you guys, and until then I hope you have a wonderful night. Join us next time in the Age of Seclusion, and farewell.
Just